I am today announcing my candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
The most important words of my life.
I'm here tonight.
I stand
before you today
to declare that I am a candidate
for President of the United States.
I am running
for President of the United States.
To declare that I am a candidate
for President
of the United States.
I'm running for president.
I am officially running
for President of the United States.
From the University of Virginia Center for Politics, this is Sabato's Crystal Ball, America Votes.
Welcome, everybody. We're happy to have you again for our 7th Crystal Ball webinar. These things are speeding along because, after all, we're now in October 1st, birthday of Jimmy Carter, our oldest lived president. Congratulations. Happy birthday, Mr. President. And in honor of Jimmy Carter, we're going to have the webinar today, pretty much proceeding as it would if it weren't President Carter's birthday. So let me turn this over to our managing editor at the Crystal Ball, Kyle Condick. Kyle, take it away.
Thanks, Larry. And we're also third member of our team, J. Miles Coleman, is with us today. And we thought we would do something different today. And so we're just going to do a reenactment of the first debate. So we're just going to talk all over each other for the next 30 minutes or so. So just watch out for that. No, I'm just kidding, of course. So yes, we're recording on October 1st here, just about a month from the presidential election. Although Americans are already voting, there's already been a few million votes cast, and that number is only going to continue to grow. If this is your first time viewing this program, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube to follow our YouTube channel, UVA-CFP. And this program is also available as a podcast on Apple, Spotify, all the podcast providers you can think of. Our 3-part documentary series on the challenges facing democracy, both in the U.S. and abroad, Dismantling Democracy. It's now available streaming online for free at pbs.org. And just go to vpm.org/dismantling-democracy. It'll be available for free there through October 15th, and it will also be available on Amazon Prime coming soon. Finally, if you'd like to support this broadcast and other work in the UVA Center for Politics, just text USA Votes to 41444. USA Votes to 41444. In the second half of the program, I'm going to be talking with Chris Jackson of Ipsos, with whom we're partnering on a new site called the Political Atlas, featuring polling, race ratings, social media trends, and more. Ipsos does a lot of polling both here in the U.S. and also internationally. They've done some polling both before and after the debate, so they have a lot of interesting conclusions and findings from their recent work. So with that, let's get into the program, and I figure probably have to start by talking about the debate. And so we have a question from Peter Bradley about that. Question is, I'm curious if you expect any significant poll movement as a result of Tuesday's fiasco. He says he doesn't, and that he thinks that Trump basically did what he wanted. He thinks that Trump just wants to sort of drag Biden down in the muck with him and basically try to turn people off the voting. Larry, what do you think about that? Do you think you've seen any effect from the debate?
Not yet. Doesn't appear to be a bump for either one. How could there be? It was the worst, most awful presidential television debate in American history. And you're talking to an old guy here who has watched every one live in real time, including the 4 Kennedy-Nixon debates back in 1960. I remember it well because I had to beg my parents to stay up. I was 8 years old, already really into politics. Anyway, it was a horrible debate. Worst advertisement possible for American democracy. And let's not play this on the one hand, on the other hand game. Let's not equalize the blame. The blame goes mostly to President Trump. His interruptions, his talking over, just outrageous, not to mention at the end his refusal to condemn white supremacy. So look, that did not help Donald Trump. He's the one who has to gain ground. He is behind. Joe Biden, as of October 1st, I think has become the clear favorite to win. People would say, oh, he always was. Well, we do things in our own time, no wine or no prediction before their time. So I think that hurt Donald Trump in that sense. He didn't gain any ground. He needs to gain ground. Biden held his own, which is a substantial lead, 7-8% nationally in the polls. Not saying that will be it on November 3rd or 5th or 10th or December 1st, whenever it is we finally get the final tally. But to me, that's what it was. It was significant for Biden hurt Trump, was a disaster for American democracy because it went around the world. And I've talked to enough, at least TV stations around the world, to know how appalled even our allies were.
You know, this sort of reminds me of just some anecdotal stories that I heard from friends and you saw online or what have you, that you know, so for some young people in the United States, maybe 10, 11, 12 years old, you know, maybe sort of around the age that you were, Larry, when you got first sort of turned on to politics and the Kennedy-Nixon debates in 1960. This was maybe the first big political event they ever watched. And you had a lot of parents across the country, I think, basically having to tell their kids, like, hey, it's usually not like this. You know, this is pretty bad. And I mean, I do think that's unfortunate. We did have another question about the debate, about kind of a more technical matter that we thought was worth getting into. And this is from Moody Chisholm from Texas. And she says, in the debate, President Trump encourages supporters to watch or monitor activities at polling places to ensure there's no fraudulent voting occurring. I would assume there are laws about hanging out around polling places within some distance. And so there are laws about this. And so, for instance, in Virginia, the law is during the times the polls are open and ballots are being counted, it should be unlawful for any person to loiter or congregate within 40 feet of any entrance of any polling place. If you look at other states, many other states have these kinds of laws on the books. And so there are laws to prevent this, but you know, I think it's reasonable to worry about kind of voter intimidation. Larry, what do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And occasionally I have seen it or seen video of groups, left, right, crazy, intimidating voters as they go in and also violating whatever the rule is in an individual state. When that happens, if the officials at the precinct are not calling the police, you go ahead and call the police. They need to be removed. That is, the groups that are violating the law or intimidating people, they need to be removed as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, so that the voting can continue.
Miles, you have some firsthand experience with these kind of laws, right? Not that you were breaking the law, that you were trying to follow the law.
Yeah. Yeah, so before I came here, I used to work with the Decision Desk HQ, and we still, at the center, we still do some stuff with them. But one of the things that we used to do is we used to, during the 2016 primary, we would go to some states and conduct some exit polls. I remember working the exit poll from the primary back in 2016. And when we went there, we would be out there with like we would have the voters take the exit poll on this iPad. But even then, we would have to stay so far back. We would have to get, because we were going to across the state of New Hampshire, we were going to about maybe a dozen locations or so. In a lot of the towns, we had to get like permits. So there are definitely rules here.
Yeah, absolutely. And their National Association of Secretaries of State has all the state laws. That's where I read that from Virginia. But I thought that's a great question because that is something that sometimes comes up. So let's switch gears here. Kind of a big morning at the Crystal Ball today. We made a lot of rating changes for the Electoral College, for the Senate, and for the U.S. House. And it was kind of it's sort of a milestone for us in the sense that we had Joe Biden pretty close to 270 electoral votes, at least leaning to him. But now we have him over 270 electoral votes. And so the most significant change was moving the state of Wisconsin from toss-up to leans Democratic. And we also sort of showed sort of more broader improvement for Biden in the Midwest. So let's bring up our new Electoral College ratings map. And so you can see it here in that we still have a number of toss-up states. We moved Ohio and Iowa to toss-up. We still have Arizona, Florida, and North Carolina as toss-ups. Larry, how do you think this sums up the race at this point?
Considering that Wisconsin has been thought to be all along one of the two pivot states, swing states that might determine who gets over 270 if this turns into a closer race. Arizona is the other one. I think it's very significant that we were able to move Wisconsin in one direction or the other. We moved it toward Biden. Yes, as we have heard from hundreds of you through Twitter and email and in person. We know that Wisconsin polls have been showing Biden ahead for quite some time, but not by a massive margin. And everybody remembers what happened in 2016. We told you from the beginning that we were going to be cautious this year. We don't make a change until we're really comfortable with it, and we can more or less, the three of us, agree and reach out to others who have a lot of knowledge on this and see that they agree with us. And so the fact that Wisconsin is now at least tentatively in Biden's category does suggest the way in which the race is moving, and so does Iowa and Ohio being toss-ups. If you had told me 6 months ago that on October 1st, we would have Iowa and Ohio in the toss-up category, I would have said immediately, well, that means Biden is winning. And still, I'll be surprised if he wins them. But the fact that it's close tells you Biden is doing very well.
We have a question from Maxwell Duncan, sort of talking about the kind of overall changes in the map. And we made sort of an observation about this today that I think other people have noted. So the question is, I appreciate if you comment on why, based on polling, Biden might be tied in Georgia, down 2 or so in Texas, but only up 5 or so in Pennsylvania, 5 or 6 in Wisconsin. To me, these averages contradict each other unless it's an actual political realignment where the Sun Belt turns blue and the Rust Belt becomes red. So I would say to this that what we're actually seeing, I think, is some reversion to 2012 in the Midwest, in that, Obama did really well in that region, and then Clinton did really terribly in that region in 2016. Biden is restoring some of the old Democratic strength in that region, it appears. But also the Sun Belt's becoming more competitive too, in large part because of the changes in kind of highly educated, affluent suburban areas around places like Atlanta and Phoenix and Dallas, Fort Worth, et cetera. And so there's a possibility for Biden that not only could he sort of restore things a little bit in the Midwest, but also make some inroads in the Sun Belt that Hillary Clinton sort of made, but didn't win any new electoral votes. So, Larry Miles, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just think that for a lot of this election, we've been hearing, okay, well, it's just going to be sort of, as you were saying, Kyle, on what we call a reversion election, or one where trends sort of accelerate. I think we're seeing it's a little of both. Maybe leaning towards more of a reversion election. I think that the Sun Belt is definitely becoming more democratic, but you still see some states like Texas where the Democrats have been trying to, turn blue for a while. That, may still be a little out of reach, but I wouldn't be surprised if Biden ends up only losing it by, say, 2 or 3, sort of like Beto O'Rourke did.
Yeah, and in our ratings, we have Iowa and Ohio as toss-ups, and we still have Georgia and Texas as leans Republican. But you could kind of make an argument that maybe both of those Sun Belt states could be toss-ups too. I'd say particularly Georgia, and that's something that we're constantly trying to reevaluate. Larry, anything else specifically on the map you think?
Well, just always remember that under our system, whether you like it or not, and I have had loads of criticisms about it and written about it for decades, the Electoral College. We don't have a national vote. We don't have a national perspective often. We have 51 separate contests, 50 states plus the District of Columbia. And like it or not, when you carry a state by 1 vote, you get 100% of the Electoral College votes. So I don't think you can look at this from a national perspective alone. You have to look at these individual state systems because they're races on their own. Doesn't matter what happens outside the border, even in their region. What matters is how voters in those states are interpreting the election.
And I think it's worth mentioning a few caveats here, and we included sort of a caveat in the crystal ball this morning that's sort of related to our next question from Charles Cena. Don't you suspect that there is a huge undercount of Trump voters, people who quietly will pull the lever for Trump, won't tell their friends it's not politically correct? And so this is a feeling you see expressed a lot of it, the so-called shy Trump vote. And one thing that I kind of worry about that I can't necessarily point to the polls for really evidence of, but is it possible that all of these polls showing Biden overperforming with white voters, and of course the Midwest is whiter than the nation as a whole, and so you're seeing real improvements for Biden in the Midwest. Is it just possible that these polls are just missing people? And there's not really a way to kind of prove that, I guess. But I do think if there's some sort of huge polling error, that might be what the poll error looks like. On the other hand, we have history of Democrats being underestimated with certain kinds of voters. So, it's something that's just sort of like a little voice in the back of my head. But I can't, there's not much evidence for it. Larry, what do you think about that?
Well, fortunately, Kyle, our health plan at UVA covers people who have voices in the back of their head. So we're going to talk about that once this is over. And I'm kidding, of course, and everyone should seek out to mental health resources when they need it. But look, I'll tell you my rule of thumb. And there have been plenty of studies suggesting there is no hidden Trump vote. I happen to think there was in 2016, and there still is. It may not be as large because Trump has been president for 4 years, and people have come to terms with that. And a lot of people will more openly express their like as well as their dislike of Donald Trump. I look at Trump's percentage in most of these polls, and I add 1 or 2 points just for people who are not lying. They're not saying they're for Biden. They're saying they're undecided, and they're not undecided. Or they're telling themselves they're undecided, but in the end, they will go into the booth or look at their punch card or whatever it is and go the very same way they went in 2016. So I add a point or two, and I don't add it for Biden. I add that to Trump. And I will add a couple of points for the Electoral College, which clearly today has, if not a pro-Republican tilt, then certainly a pro-Trump tilt. May not show up this November. He's not doing what he did in 2016. That is not, the election's not evolving his way. But I think it's worth adding a point or two for hidden vote, point or two for the Electoral College. You could even argue 3 points for the Electoral College, but I'm going to keep it at a total of maybe 3.5. Well, that puts Trump back up very close to what he got in 2016, close to, maybe not quite at 46%. But we don't have the independent and third party vote that we had in 2016, 6% in 2016. We've estimated for a long time that it will go down substantially, cut probably in half, maybe to 3%. That means Trump needs more than 46% to win, even with the Electoral College.
Yeah, I think that's right. And there are also just fewer undecideds. Oh, Miles, go ahead.
I don't know if you guys saw this last night, but there was a tweet from Nate Silver who was like, well, maybe if the shy Trump people are too shy to answer the polls for Trump, they're too shy to vote for him too.
I don't agree with that. No, they're not shy in the booth. They're all by themselves, and they can let it all hang out, as we used to say in the 60s. Let it all hang out.
Another question that I think maybe gets a possible caveat for this election is from Matt Phillips here, and he says, we keep hearing about the Trump campaign having a massive voter identification and GOT fee operation, while the Biden campaign has largely foregone door knocking in light of COVID, relies instead on text and phone banking. Do we have a strong sense as to whether this is true? And if so, how likely is it to matter? It is reasonable to say, I think that's a true statement in that the Trump folks are doing a lot more door-to-door stuff, and also Trump is obviously doing a lot more, big picture or big campaign events. Biden did a little train tour in Ohio and Pennsylvania yesterday, and he did have some crowds for those things, but it's not like Trump has done. And there is some evidence that if you're going to be doing GOTV, that door knocking is maybe a little bit more effective, but it's also harder to do than texting or phone banking. So I don't know if there are any other reactions to that question.
It's a plus. I've talked to enough people who are in some of those key states. Democrats are worried and Republicans are crowing about it. Now, again, it's hard to quantify before the election. Probably after the election, we'll get at least some statistical analysis of what effect, if any, it had. I'd say it probably adds a point or two. And let's not forget, the Trump people had 3 years of open campaign activity since Trump filed for re-election on the day he was inaugurated. And their goal was not to convert people. And Trump's goal has never been to convert people. He's never really reached out to Democrats and independents who didn't support him. Their focus has been on the Trump people who didn't vote, who weren't registered, or were registered and didn't show up. And they're determined to pull millions of them out to vote for Trump this time. Will it happen? Your guess is as good as mine. I kind of think some of it is going to happen. And that may make this closer than the polls suggest, or even that our map suggests.
Let's talk about the Senate real quick. Go ahead, Miles. Sorry.
What I wanted to kind of quickly add on to that was like, I guess last night we at the Crystal Ball we put out about a dozen changes in the House. One of the Democratic operatives who follows me on Twitter was like, "Oh yeah, I just phone banged for 4 or 5 of those candidates." So I think it just shows a lot of this can be done, not in person.
Right.
So I think that may be an underrated factor.
Speaking of, let's move to the Senate real quick here. We did make a couple changes in the U.S. Senate today. We moved Cory Gardner, essentially made him a bigger underdog in his reelection bid in Colorado. We moved that race from leans Democratic to likely Democratic. And we also kind of identified a real sleeper race, I think, out in Alaska. We moved that from likely Republican to leans Republican. There are some local factors, I think, in what is kind of a quirky state that kind of helped prompt us to do that. Miles, what were those?
Yeah, sure. So for most of these Senate races, we talk about the impacts of nationalization and polarization. Alaska, in a lot of ways, likes to do its own thing. So in Alaska, you have an independent, Dr. Al Gross, who's running as the Democratic nominee with their support. He's running against first-term Republican Dan Sullivan. Usually for Republicans to lose in Alaska, they need to be on the wrong side of some major local issue. There is a big project, what they call the Pebble Mine in Alaska. Basically, there were some tapes that was leaked. The CEOs of this project were kind of bragging about their connections to some of the local politicians. One of those being Dan Sullivan. So it has very much it's already played into some of Al Gross's ads. It's already had Sullivan on somewhat of the defensive. And then in my mind, I don't think that something that's going to happen very soon in Washington is we're going to probably have a very contentious Supreme Court hearing. So Alaska, it's a red state, but it's a very libertarian state. Most of the electorate is pro-choice. I'm sure a big part of the Democratic messaging is going to be Judge Barrett is against the Affordable Care Act. Well, healthcare is very expensive in Alaska. And just a final note there is if Gross is going to have any chance, he's going to need to get a big vote from the Alaska Natives. And back during the Kavanaugh hearings in 2018, in very much of a rare move, the Alaska Federation of Natives came out against Judge Kavanaugh. So I think it could, another court fight could potentially help him energize with those voters. So I've heard from one operative told me, okay, well, Alaska very much feels like a Montana. So we have Montana as leans Republican. So I guess it makes sense to have Alaska there as well.
some big developments in the Senate just this morning. SLF, Senate Leadership Fund, which is the big outside Republican group linked to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. They made a big booking to prop up Lindsey Graham in South Carolina. They're also spending a lot against Democrat Gary Peters in Michigan, which we still have Peters and Graham narrowly favored, but those races seem to be very much heating up. And so there's going to be a lot going on in the Senate down the stretch here. Just a few more questions before we get to my interview with Chris Jackson of Ipsos. This one is from Heike Giragosian. I'm sorry if I messed up your name there. UVA, who works with us, UVA. He had a question about Florida, and he says, I realize Florida's always close, but during the blue wave midterm of 2018, Democrats lost 2 statewide races, governor and senator. Could that be evidence that the state is trending Republican, given that the national sentiment that year was toward the Democrats? Florida is always a really close and really tricky state. Larry, what about Florida?
Yeah. Yes. First of all, if we mispronounced your name, you are permitted under our rules to mispronounce our names for at least 1 month. So that's Kyle Kandicki, I think, something like that. I don't know.
To say Klondike, like Klondike bars.
Klondike bar,
Right.
yeah. Or Larry Sabato, or Sabato, or all the other pronunciations I get mainly from abroad. Anyway, look, here it is on Florida. You put your finger on something that influences my view of Florida every time I discuss it and what's going to happen in this presidential race. I'm sorry to the Florida Democrats who are listening, but you all have screwed up time after time after time. You always overpromise and underdeliver. And whether it was 2016 and the presidential race, or 2018 and the governor's race and the Senate race, you clearly have fallen behind the Republicans in terms of campaign organization. You're having serious problems with the Hispanic vote in general, not just Cuban Americans, but other pieces of the Hispanic vote, which is a very complex part of the Florida system. And we're now at the point, all of us, everybody in this whole business, not just us, is at the point where you have to show us, because we don't believe you. And we're going to believe you when you deliver. So in my own mind, even though I see all these polls with Biden up 2 or 3 points, and maybe it'll turn out that way, maybe this is your year for a comeback. But until I see it, I'm going to give an edge to Republicans in Florida. That's my view. I don't know whether you guys agree with me or not.
There are a lot of interesting cross currents in some of the kind of like you read about congressional district polls and other kind of localized polling in Florida, that it does seem like Trump has regained some ground with some Latino voters in South Florida. And it doesn't seem like Biden is going to do as well in Miami-Dade County as Hillary Clinton did. On the other hand, in some other parts of the state, like the Tampa-St. Petersburg area, Biden seems to be doing a little bit better. There was actually a poll of Hillsborough County, which is Tampa, this morning from that showed Biden doing several points better than Clinton did. So a lot going on in that state, and sometimes a lot of the trends within the state maybe cancel themselves out, and you're left with another close race potentially. And that actually leads to the final question from Julie Chan, which is, how and when should we expect information about election results to be revealed on Election Day? Will we hear any useful information before polls close? We're going to be talking about this a lot, I'm sure, over the next month. Florida actually is a good place to watch because Florida actually counts its votes pretty quickly. They're used to having a lot of early voting, a lot of mail-in voting, and the results usually come out pretty quickly. So Florida may give us some good sense, and if one of the two candidates wins Florida by more than 2 or 3 points, that's probably indicative of the winning the election overall.
And certainly it's indicative of Biden winning the election if he carries Florida, because there's really, technically there's a way for you to cobble together 270 votes for Trump without Florida. Realistically, if he loses Florida, he's a goner. So I doubt we have that quick a decision even on Florida, but who knows if if this is a wide margin for one or the other candidate. Maybe we'll know by the early hours of November 4th. I wouldn't make a bet on that. And if I were you, I'd plan on getting plenty of sleep both before and after November 3rd, because it ought to be election week. I just don't see how we can avoid election week. A lot of close races, not just presidential. So we'll be lucky if we have the clear outlook, or a relatively clear outlook, by the Friday evening, or maybe even that weekend. So that's what you should plan on. If you're lucky, and we're all lucky, we'll find out earlier.
Yeah, just be prepared for that. Again, that's something that we're going to be talking about, I'm sure, and trying to provide some pointers on. And I know many people are talking to that.
What's a little ironic is you have a lot of people on the Trump campaign who are saying, okay, well, we have to, we really have to know the result on election night. Well, if we do, it's probably not going to be good for Trump. So
yeah, I mean, that's probably true, because some of it does seem like there's going to be a difference between election day voting and mail-in voting, with the mail-in voting being much more Democratic in a lot of places, and election day being much more Republican leaning. And some states are going to count the election day votes first, and so it may we may get a big batch of results from states that really don't look much at all like what the eventual end results are going to look like. So, and again, we'll have more to say about that, I'm sure, on this program. And in the crystal ball going forward here. So with that, thanks, Larry. Thanks, Miles. And we're going to go to the second part of the program, which is my interview with Chris Jackson of Ipsos. Joined now by our friend Chris Jackson from Ipsos. He's a senior vice president there, and he also works on a lot of their public polling. Chris, thanks for joining us.
Kyle, great to be with you.
So Ipsos, along with the Center for Politics, just launched the new 2020 Political Atlas. That's political-atlas.com. All sorts of features there, including social media data, estimated county level support and approval rate, favorability ratings for the two major party candidates, and much more. Chris, what have you learned from the various features on this site?
So the Political Atlas has a lot of the things that we've kind of gotten used to of poll aggregates. It pulls in the UVA crystal ball data, so it's a handy, nice little mapped version of that to look at. But the thing I've found that I look at it the most for is it also surfaces the most sort of viral videos, the most viral social media posts about the two candidates across a range of issues at any given point in time. So you can see, what's the most viral post or viral video about Biden and coronavirus, or about Trump and the economy at any one point in time. And it honestly, it's really opened my eyes to the extent to which a lot of the disinformation and a lot of the fake news that we've heard so much about is still actually very much out there, and is still very much driving a lot of conversation people are having. And it seems like, and this is totally qualitative, but it seems like for every legitimate news story that is being widely shared, there's probably one and a half fake news or propaganda or just outright conspiracy theory things that are going around at the same time. And I think that just helps really underline the extent to which this election isn't really about some sort of objective truth, but it's about this sort of fog of war we're all sort of living in right now.
Yeah, it's always striking to me as someone who, Chris, you're probably the same way, who's sort of a consumer mostly of, I guess, what you consider sort of mainstream news sources and kind of legacy media organizations, that so much of the information that people are actually getting out there don't come from the sort of legacy kind of sources that you or I or many others might look at.
Yeah, I think that's true. And in fact, one of the things we're going to build into the next round of the Political Atlas before the election is a way to actually look at how people are consuming news through sort of what channels. So, I think you or I will get up in the morning and, we live in the DC area. So we'll go on the Washington Post or WashingtonPost.com and sort of look directly there for news. But a lot of people instead are getting their news from aggregators, sites like Yahoo or Apple News, or they're getting it from Facebook, from social media. So one of the things we're doing is not just trying to find out how people are, where the news originally came from. Did it come from the Post? Did it come from Fox? Did it come from, something else? But what's the path it's actually taking to get to people, right? Is it going through these aggregators? Is it going through social media? To help understand a little bit more about what this actual sort of ecosystem really looks like, because I think there's still a lot that's not known about it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Do you think at some point that factors like social media trends and other things can be used as predictive for elections, or do you think we're still? I mean, we use polls, I guess, now mostly as sort of the best tools to try to figure out who's up and who's down. But do you think there's any value for that maybe going forward?
Yeah, I think, social media is still very much, I don't think, ready to be the sole indicator of what we think is going to happen in the election. There's just too much unknown. There's too much sort of chaos or noise. Social media doesn't really provide a perfect cover of the population. But it is a useful indicator. And we've had discussions with you in the past about how election forecasting really shouldn't be about looking at just kind of a single type of information. And this is what you guys do, where you look across just mountains and mountains of things, financial reporting, poll data, past election results, voter registration levels, like all of these different types of information. Social media is useful in that regard because it is a proxy for the amount of activity and the amount of enthusiasm that exists, but it's an imperfect proxy, right? Like just like fundraising doesn't necessarily tell you who's going to win, but it can give you a signal about who's got more advantages built in, so can give you a little bit more information to help you make a slightly better educated guess at the end of the day.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's so much information out there, and I think we're still kind of figuring out exactly maybe what to do with it. But I think this political atlas project is cool in the sense that there's just a lot of stuff that you can look at on there, and again, many different pieces of information. So folks should check that out. Again, it's political-atlas.com. Let's talk about the presidential race here. Ipsos obviously does a lot of polling, both at the national and the state level. Where do you guys see the race right now?
Yeah, it's an interesting contest. At the beginning of the year, we thought this election was going to be Trump's to lose. We thought he was really in the driver's seat. The economy was in good shape. His approval ratings, while not great, weren't horrible either. So we really thought he had an advantage. And of course, coronavirus and the economy, and then the Black Lives Matter protests that erupted over the summer, all of that sort of shaken things up a little bit. So we're in a place now where we think that Biden has a slight advantage. He certainly has a pretty significant advantage in the national polls. That being said, Trump's approval ratings have still remained pretty robust considering all the crazy stuff that's happened. I mean, you can't think of a more momentous year in American history, certainly not in recent American history than this one. And yet Trump's approval rating hasn't really gone down below, 39% maybe. And an incumbent president with that kind of support, you should never really count them out. So we think at worst, Trump has a 1 in 3 chance of winning the election, and he potentially has even up to a 2 in 5 chance of winning the election if circumstances sort of pan in his direction. If COVID sort of declines as a major issue, seems to get a little bit under control, it could really sort of play into his hands, and he could have good odds. So yeah, we definitely think this election is not a sure thing. We think it's very much still up in the air.
Yeah, one of the interesting points that one of your colleagues, Cliff Young, makes a lot, and he does a lot of international look at elections in other countries. That you'd think 40% is like a pretty low number for an incumbent president or a ruling party or what have you. But actually, he always argues that the 40% is actually the number over which you might actually be in a decent place to win re-election, which is what you're suggesting, I guess, about where Trump's standing is that it's not great, but it's also not fatal.
Yeah, and if you look at recent American history at incumbent presidents running for re-election, the ones who've lost had worse approval ratings than Trump did right now. George H.W. Bush's approval rating just before the election was around 35. Jimmy Carter was around 33. So, I mean, we're, a good bit lower, even up to almost 10 points lower than where Trump is now. However, the ones who won re-election, like Obama, George W. Bush, Reagan, they all had approval ratings at about 50% or greater. So Trump's in this sort of gray area where we don't have great precedent, which is why we sort of think this election remains sort of much more of a coin flip. If Trump's approval ratings was more solid, we think it'd be more of a clear case for his reelection. If it were weaker, it'd be more of a clear case that he was going to get turned out. But I think we're in sort of a middling scenario where it really could go either way.
You all have been doing some post-debate or polling both before and after the debate. Obviously, we had the debate on Tuesday night. You all have some numbers about the debate. What stood out to you all, or what did the numbers show?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that stood out is that debate was quite a spectacle. I think everyone was a little bit blown away by just how fiery it was. But the data we have from our recent survey with 538, we did a survey where we talked to people before the debate, asked them a bunch of questions about their sentiment about the candidates, their potential to vote for the candidates, if the candidates lined up on various issues. And then we went back to the exact same individuals after the debate to see if they'd changed at all, changed their attitudes at all as potentially as a consequence of the debate. And what we saw is that this debate really doesn't seem like it has changed things at any major level, right? It's very much sort of a status quo kind of thing. Going in, more people were said that they were considering voting for Biden than Trump. Coming out of it, it's basically unchanged. People sort of actually have about the same level of expectation that Trump or Biden could win. That's basically changed. People say that a large majority of people who watch the debate say that Biden won, almost 2-1. People say that Biden did a good job, Trump did a good job, but it doesn't seem to be moving people. And I think that really illustrates just the extent to which people are entrenched in their positions, and that there's just not a lot of swing voters left available. It's probably fewer than 1 in 10 Americans, maybe as few as 1 in 20 Americans now that are actually still up for grabs. And in that environment, it's just hard to really gain new converts. I think the one thing that may have come out of this for Biden is his supporters were a little softer going into it, with more people saying that they were somewhat favorable, and that's a little bit harder, a little bit more of the very favorable. So that's positive for him, but at the top line, no real shift.
That is interesting too, that I think you all have found something that we've seen reflected in other places in betting markets as well, that however well Biden is polling, generally speaking, people are a little bit less confident in him actually winning, which maybe is just sort of, kind of leftover feelings from being burned in 2016, I guess, and that maybe Democrats are a little less confident in Biden winning than Republicans are confident in Trump winning. Do you think there's any sort of predictive value in the sort of the who do you think will win question, as opposed to the just generic sort of horse race question?
We've seen a lot of people sort of tout that as a useful indicator. I'm not terribly convinced, because I think that who you think is going to win really is just more reflecting what people are seeing in news coverage than anything else. I do think that a well done public opinion poll sort of tells you more about where people's sentiments, where their potential to vote lies, and then combining that with a lot of other information sources and expert judgment, that gives you sort of the best indication of what's going to happen.
Yeah, and of course, in 2016, the situation was kind of reversed in that Clinton was sort of expected as the winner more so than she was actually leading in the polls.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's sort of the opposite, which is kind of interesting. But the who do you think will win question I don't think was particularly useful in 2016, at least in terms of trying to project the election winner.
Yeah, that's right.
One of the things we always hear about from readers is just asking about polling methods, and obviously there are lots of different ways to poll. Ipsos does online polling in the United States. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you all conduct your polls here in the U.S.?
Yeah, so I mean, Ipsos is fundamentally a methodologically agnostic company. We'll do sort of anything if it's the right tool to answer the survey or the research question we're trying to do. But most of our work in the United States is done in commercial online panels. These are the types of research tools that have been built for private sector research. So, there's just massive amounts of research being done every day in this country for commercial work about product testing or advertising development, things like that. And we've essentially used these platforms, which have tens of millions of people in them, to do our political polling and opinion research, and have been doing so for about a decade now to some pretty good success. And basically the way it works is Ipsos and other companies recruit people into these panels to take surveys, again, primarily for commercial purposes, right? People testing out cereal and shampoo and stuff like that. And then we glean off the top representative samples of the population to do our surveys. So, we'll do like, there's 100,000 surveys being done across a couple of week period, and we'll glean 1,000 off of them to ask political questions. And make sure our 1,000 is represented over the country by gender and age and ethnicity and race and educational attainment and geography and all the other sort of key demographic variables. But that's not really our only approach. We do still do things like phone and face-to-face, particularly when we do work in other markets. We do a lot of face-to-face research, which is prohibitively expensive here. We still do some mail surveys, which are just incredibly slow for the contemporary environment. But yeah, we really sort of are open to doing anything. It's just online is sort of the best tool for us right now in the United States, given its speed, its affordability, and sort of the American market's taste for really fast information.
One of the big problems, I guess, and I guess it's maybe a problem across all different kinds of polling, but you particularly see it in telephone polling, that you really have to call just a ton of people to get a representative sample. And I guess it certainly seems to me that as we move forward here, that I guess I would expect more and more polling to be done online, primarily like the way that you guys primarily do in the United States. I mean, do you think that that's a reasonable way to think about it? That over time, online polling, more and more firms will sort of go into the online polling realm?
I mean, that's certainly been true. Phone response rates really started dipping in the early aughts, really as cell phones essentially became a thing. And response rates have essentially been declining ever since. From the late 90s, you would essentially make like 4 phone calls and get 1 respondent. Now, if you're doing really good, you're making 10 phone calls for 1 respondent, and more likely 20 calls for a respondent. And you're paying people that entire time, right, to do those interviews, make those calls. So it ends up costing a lot of money. So we have seen a lot of work migrate from phone to online research. Almost the entirety of the commercial research industry is now being done online. There's very little of it done on phone. And some of the last holdouts of phone research are public opinion surveys like election surveys, academic surveys, potentially because they can take advantage of academic calling centers staffed with students who, they're able to get relatively high quality interviewers for cheap, and the government, because government has money, can afford it, right? So yeah, it's definitely going that way. I don't think we'll ever see phone surveys fully go extinct, but I definitely think you're just going to see fewer of them as they get increasingly difficult to do. And I think they'll probably see increasingly new methodologies sort of emerging as alternates to what we're doing now. I mean, there's a lot of people testing out text messaging based surveys with a lot of different varieties. There's people trying to take advantage of sort of digital intercept type surveys where people are essentially sort of take a couple of survey questions before they're able to access things on the internet. There's all sorts of different methodologies people are playing with, and we don't really know what the next one is going to be, but there will be, I think, a next one, and we're just going to see a continuing evolution of how we get information, how we essentially hear people, when they care, what they care about, what they want.
Yeah, the text message approach is one that I've definitely started to see pop up in some of the political surveys, and that sort of seems like something that might become more.
Yeah, I mean, the text message thing has the advantage of being fast and cheap, which are things that political election pollsters, campaign pollsters particularly like. They like fast and cheap. And you can essentially use like a voter list, a list of phone numbers to do it, so you can target it really efficiently. There's still some big question marks about how good a representative sample of the population you can get from that, but those are the kind of problems people are working to solve. And text message based research is actually extremely popular in Africa, where no one has a landline phone number. Getting people sort of fixed mailing addresses is difficult. There's transportation challenges doing face-to-face research, but almost everyone has access to a cell phone. So text message surveys are actually getting to be extremely popular in a lot of emerging markets.
Interesting. So last point before I let you go, this is not specifically about political polling, although I thought it was really interesting. You all have been doing a number of polls on COVID-19 as well, and one of them was with Axios recently, and it was about a question about whose advice Americans would take on whether they get a coronavirus vaccine. What did you find with that?
Yeah, so I think the one thing to really make clear is the way we ask our question in this Axios Ipsos survey is we're asking people how likely are they to get the first generation COVID vaccine. So we're really asking a very specific question about early adoption, basically, because we're sort of asking it in the mind of the election, in the mind of President Trump trying to push a vaccine out before November 3rd. So we're trying to just find out, like, is that actually a thing that might move the needle? And what we find is that the majority of Americans say no, that they are not likely to get the first generation COVID vaccine, sort of full stop. It's only about 35% who say yes, but that is actually really flexible based on who's advocating for it. And if we tell people that their personal physician, their personal doctor is saying they should get it, we see the number jump up into the 60s. About 60% of Americans say they'd be likely to get it if their doctor were to prescribe it, versus like President Trump. And if President Trump were to be the one advocating for it, it's in the teens, which I think just it's a messenger issue, right? It's who's a trusted messenger on the vaccine, a trusted messenger of safety. But I do think that really illustrates the difficulty we're going to have as a country once there is a vaccine, hopefully soon, getting that actually out into the public, getting that out into people to sort of accept it, because I think we have seen it becoming increasingly politicized, and people are very skeptical right now of the safety of that. And I think people are extremely sensitive to safety right now. So that's going to make it really difficult for us to get the population vaccinated quickly, unless we can figure out some way to sort of take the politics out of the whole topic.
Yeah, and it also seems like that specifying it's the kind of the first generation one is an important caveat there. That I think there are a lot of people who probably would want a vaccine, but would sort of prefer to see some other people take it before
Exactly. Yeah. And we've seen other data, and a couple of other research companies have released data suggesting that the number of people who are ultimately interested in getting a coronavirus vaccine is much higher. It's 60-70% of the population, sort of akin to what we see with the flu. But there is, I think, a lot of hesitancy to sort of be that guinea pig, that first person to get it.
Right. Chris, thank you so much for joining us again. Chris Jackson, our friend from Ipsos.
Thanks. Great to be with you, Cal.
Thank you.